If there's any school administrators here, Karen needs she's a counselor, school counselor, and she's going to need a position. If there's one thing a church averaging about 700 people on Sunday ought to do, it's to pull some strings. So we need to get our folks together, and she has put out a few letters, but nothing's happened yet. Same way with Joey. Joey's a librarian. She ended up being a teacher, but we'll see what happens. All right. King David danced in a parade as the Ark of God was returned to the city of Jerusalem. So let's assume David wrote this. The writer of Ecclesiastes, Solomon, tells us, of making it very condensed, there is a time to mourn and there is a time to dance. One time, a United Methodist bishop was asked, can Methodists dance? And he said, well, some can and some can't. A friend of mine who had been a marriage counselor for some time, for 30 years, says that he has never known a couple to split up who regularly danced together. Psalm 30, our text for today, has something to say significant about dancing. The author, King David, tells us his personal story that moves from proud self-sufficiency. You know, you got him at the beginning and then he tells his story. It would probably have been better to start with my self-sufficiency, right? I mean, that really is where it begins. And he moves from this proud self-sufficiency to a lonely separation from God. And then he ends up on such a joyful, overwhelmingly happy note that he feels like dancing. First, let's look at verse 6. David confesses his proud self-sufficiency. As for me, I said in my prosperity, I shall never be moved. I remember when my retirement account got to the place where I said to you, when I stop having fun, I'm done. You know, that's a great place to be. But how naive that is. I mean, the bottom could drop out. I mean, don't we all go there? I mean, we reach this place where we actually think, I mean, we've got our making a good salary, we got our pension program. I've told y'all before, a lot of you tell me, many of you, well, you know I'm on fixed income. Well, you're pretty fixed. Let's put it that way. You are fixed pretty well, you know. And we say, I got a roof over my head, you know, I got plenty of insurance, and we can actually go alone secure in our security. Actually feeling like we are independent of God. Now, you wouldn't actually say, if someone asked you, are you independent of God? You wouldn't say yes if you thought about it. But I mean, we live as if we are. We can go through days and days without even considering God. I can't because I got the dang building program over there. But you could probably. I mean, many of us can just not even think about our need of a tight relationship with God. And that is the very point when we get into trouble in regard to talking about the enemy of faith. Prosperity, not hard times. I've discovered this. This is a fact. Prosperity, not hard times, is truly the great enemy of faith. It surely can be. Register this truth solidly in your heart. It is difficult to know God unless you know your need for God. I mean, why even smile, stretch, and put on Jesus in the morning? Which you're probably not doing every morning. Why do that if you don't expect to have a need for God today? We just forget, don't we? We just walk into the... It is hard to know God unless you know your need for God. And let me tell you, when you have that need, you will know that you need to know God. Isn't it true that most of the time we feel we don't need God? It's not that God has let us down or that God has made us angry. It's simply we don't sense in our daily, everyday lives a need for God's presence and participation in our lives. David said, "In my prosperity, I shall never be moved." Excuse me. Now, look next to the latter part of verse 7. David, in his self-sufficiency, drifts from God's presence. He becomes aware of the awful absence of God. Now, I assure you, some people think it was the death of his son. Something happened that pulled him, drew him into this awareness of separation. And I tell you, if he's like everybody else in grief, what's he doing? He's blaming God for it, is what he's doing. He has separated himself from God, and he's blaming. Now he says, "Thou didst hide thy face, Lord. You hid your face from me, and I was in despair. I was dismayed." Have you ever felt the absence of God in your life? Sometimes it is because we have drifted away from God. Other times it's because, matter of fact is, life can break your heart, can it? Life can break your heart, and the hurt is so deep that we can't see God through the pain. Even Jesus cried out from a cruel cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Verse 9 of the Psalm 30 brings the psalmist to another place. He's trying to bargain with God. I can't tell you how many times. I do this all the time. Forgive me, Lord. I do it all the time. I start feeling guilty. I start feeling like I'm not headed the right direction. I start bargaining. And we've all done that. The psalmist says to God, and this is the Pennington version, "You know, God, if I die, you're going to lose your best advertising agent. Why in the world? You need to look out for me, because that's just going to be good business for you." Right? We get at the bargaining table. "Lord, if you'll just fix my marriage, if you'll fix her, I'll give 10%, I'll really do it, 10% of my income to your work. Or, Lord, if you would just get me out of this financial trouble. Just give me another chance here. I will even teach junior high Sunday school class." Now, that is the ultimate sacrifice. But God doesn't play let's make a deal. He just doesn't do it. He never meets us at a bargaining table. In verse 10 of Psalm 30, the psalmist David comes to his senses, and he simply throws himself on the mercy of God. And that's a good place to be. And I want to invite all of you to that place. And it's not a, "Oh Lord, I come here to you in mercy." No. It's a place we can run to dancing. It's a place we can come expecting, knowing that God is going to receive us. It's a good place to be. And that's really what we're doing when we come to the sacrament, isn't it? That's why I tell y'all you need to dance up here. Not many of you do, a few. But this is come to the table. It's like being out playing all day and the bell rings. Come on. And that's exactly what happens. David comes to his senses. He comes to God. "Hear, O Lord, and be gracious to me. O Lord, be thou my helper." In other words, no excuses, no deals, no bargains, just a humble believer bowing before a powerful and gracious God. Do you realize, I assume you do, that we just aren't fair with God? We're never fair with God. I Romans 12:2 message. You've heard me talk about it over and over again, that we should be focusing on the things God has done for us. And if we do, we're going to be dancing. No matter what, we're going to be dancing. But we don't do that, do we? We just ignore and take for granted all the multitude of miracles and blessings and grace God pours out on us every day. But something bad happened. You get hit out there in the parking lot, or you hit somebody. I bet one of the first things God, you're going to blame God. God gets a lot of blame. It's just not fair for God. Every day we should be thankful. We say, how can this be happening, Lord? I thought I was one of your favorites, at least in the top 20%. How could this be happening to me, your servant? The climax of Psalm 30 comes when King David realizes this glorious fact. Even when God seems absent, He is powerfully present. Even when I desert God in my foolishness and self-sufficiency, God never deserts me. No situation is ever so bleak that God cannot redeem it. When the psalmist realized the width, the height, and the depth of God's grace, he exclaimed, my favorite verse, I bet it is yours too, in this particular psalm, verses 11 and 12, Thou hast turned my mourning into dancing. Thou hast loosed my sackcloth and girded me with gladness, that my soul may praise Thee and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give thanks to Thee forever. And then he begins to dance, right? Don't you ever feel like dancing? Why not? There's a bird in Europe called the chaffinch. It's about the size, it's about the color of our robin. It has a beautiful song. People keep it in their homes just to hear it sing. But the chaffinch has a peculiar characteristic. And it's not uncommon. It forgets how to sing. And when it forgets how to sing, it becomes depressed and dies. And the only way to save it from this death is to carry it into the wild, so what? It can learn how to sing again. A lot of us, now Lawrence is going to drag this out of you, I assure, but we need to learn how to sing. We need to learn how to worship. We need to learn how to dance. We need to carry it in the day. It's catchy. People are going to be asking you, what's wrong with you? But we gotta sometimes come together and learn. And we need to teach how to be joyful, how to be thankful, and how to dance and sing again. What is it that's keeping you from dancing? What is it? A little boy, I love this story, was visiting his grandparents on their farm. I love it because it's just like mine, except mine was a BB gun and not a slingshot, pretty much. He had a new slingshot. He couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with it. And that evening, he saw Grandma's pet duck walking around. And just out of impulse, he took the shot. And he hit that duck square in the head and killed it. Now, he was shocked, he was guilty, he was horrified, he was remorseful, fearful, all at the same time. Especially when he discovered his sister Sally saw the whole thing. Even saw him taking that duck and burying it, hiding it behind the wood pile. His sister didn't say anything, but the threat was looming. After lunch the next day, Grandma said, Sally, let's go in there and wash the dishes. And Sally said, but Grandma, Johnny, he has been wanting to wash dishes for a long time. She leaned over to her brother and said, "Remember the duck." So Johnny did the dishes. And later that day, Grandpa asked if the children wanted to go fishing. And Grandma said, "Well, I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I need Sally to help me with supper." And Sally just smiled. She said, "You know, Grandma, Johnny has been wanting to learn how to cook. I mean, he has just been bugging me and upset that I'm always the one that gets to do that. And he said he wanted to help." And she leaned over and whispered to Johnny, "Remember the duck." So Sally went fishing. Johnny stayed to help. And after several days of this, Johnny finally couldn't stand it any longer. He came to Grandma and confessed that he had killed her pet duck. Grandma knelt down, gave him a big hug. She said, "Sweetheart, you know, I already knew that. I saw it. I was standing at the window, saw the whole thing. And because I love you so much, I forgave you right there on the spot. I'm just wondering how long you're going to let Sally make a slave of you." What is it? Who is it that is keeping your soul in the corner, cringing instead of joining in on the dance? What hidden weights, burdens are keeping your feet fixed on the floor? What's making a slave of you, keeping you out of joy's way? Y'all remember junior high? I never danced. Never danced at one of those junior high dances. Did you? I was scared to death to get out. I was over in the corner, wouldn't even move. But it didn't take me long when I got to high school to discover that I'm never going to dance if I don't get up and do it, you know? And I'm never going to get that girl I want to dance with me until I get up and get in her way and ask her. My gosh, the girls will dance with themselves up there. And they did it because we guys were scared to death. What's keeping you from getting up and getting in the way of God's grace and God's joy? When we receive this communion, this Holy Communion, is it not an invitation to receive God's forgiveness, to glory in His grace, counting His blessings one by one? We are, in fact, as we come, we are accepting an invitation to dance.